today's event that we are putting on in conjunction with the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Today's event is on the importance of protecting minorities in Syria, and we'll also be having a general discussion about U.S. policy towards Syria in general. My name is Mohammed Ghanem. I am the Director of Government Relations with the Syrian American Council. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., but I travel frequently to the region and other key capitals. The Syrian American Council is the oldest and largest Syrian American community organization. It's a multi-ethnic, multi-faith, non-partisan organization that is working to promote freedom and democracy in Syria. We are thrilled today to have two very distinguished guests in our midst that will be addressing you shortly. First, joining us is Sheikh Muhammad Ali. He needs no introduction, but I will be talking a little bit about Sheikh Yaqoubi, what he did in Damascus, and what he's before he left Syria, and what he's doing now. Sheikh Yaqoubi is a former preacher at Grand Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, the city I originally come from. He's known for his very strong stance against both the brutal Assad regime and ISIS. And he's the author of a new book, Refuting ISIS. It's a landmark publication in which he calls on all Muslims in the region to fight and combat ISIS. A few months ago, Sheikh Yaqoubi was on CNN with Christian and Poor. He was on NewsHour, and he was also in the Washington Post in an op-ed that went viral and was trending about both the Assad regime and ISIS, and we're very honored to have him with us today. Secondly, we're also we will be joined by Hind, a personal friend of mine and the director of Interfaith Peacebuilding Center at the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. Hind is a Christian activist. She's a Syrian Christian activist who also took a very clear stand against Assad regime and ISIS at a great personal cost. Recently, the Assad regime sentenced Hind to execution, partly because she addressed the Congress of the United States of America. A few days later, her name came up at the so-called terrorism court in Syria for fomenting violence in Syria. She's just returned from Gaziantep, where she conducted interfaith programs between rabbis, Syrian activists, Syrian priests, and imams, and she has a history of facilitating interfaith meetings between the leaders of different religious persuasions in Syria. And she also is very well known for promoting tolerance and working very hard with Syrians on building conflict resolution capacity and skills. We at SAC stand very strongly with the protection of Syrian minorities, who are an integral part of the fabric of Syrian society. In the past 4 years, the Assad regime, through its policies of torture, destruction, and starvation, has exacerbated and inflamed sectarian tensions in Syria by creating the conditions that strengthen groups like ISIS and other extremists, and by driving Christians out of Syria in hordes. The Assad regime continues to directly fund, financially support groups such as ISIS through lucrative oil deals, something the EU and the US government have confirmed in their sanctions against George Hasbani, who was sanctioned for facilitating such deals between ISIS and the Assad regime. The Syrian Network for Human Rights, in a recent report, noted that the Assad regime has destroyed more churches in Syria than any other group. About 63% of churches in Syria, according to the Syrian Network for Human Rights, have been destroyed by the Assad regime. Our organization believes in a free and democratic Syria, and we long for the day where minorities in Syria can be granted equal citizenship, full rights, and both Assad and ISIS can be defeated. Indeed, Syria is no longer a problem defined by its borders. I just came back from Brussels, in Belgium, where I saw refugee camps and a lot of Syrian refugees in downtown Brussels. Ironically, right next to the World Trade Center's two towers in Brussels. It was such a heartbreaking scene. I have never ever imagined in my life that one day I would go to Brussels to see fellow brethren from Syria, taking refuge in these very large numbers. On 2 Saturdays ago, Germany alone received 13,000 Syrian refugees on that day. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Saif, my colleague Saif Inam, who will be moderating today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Saif. I'm with a policy analyst with the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Just real quick, we have lunch and we're going to get right to it. So we're going to ask Sheikh Yaqoubi to come talk about his new book where he ideologically refutes ISIS's ideology and advocates for the protection of minorities, including Christians and Yazidis in Syria. So Sheikh Yaqoubi.
Ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you all. Refuting ISIS is the title of my new book. What is unique about the book is it was written in Arabic first, published in Arabic, aimed at people inside Syria, and made already huge impact. It was published 3 months ago. 30,000 copies in Arabic were distributed inside Syria, targeting Syrian citizens, young people, which ISIS is trying to recruit. Targeting also fighters with various fractions in the opposition or FSA, Free Syrian Army, who also sometimes jump from one camp to another camp. Targeting also ISIS fighters who have just joined to convince them or make the truth clear in front of them. The book made a huge impact, and several people who were hesitant to fight ISIS made it an obligation to fight ISIS. There were several military groups who were considering that fighting ISIS is a Muslim fighting a Muslim, which is not permitted in Islam. The book convinced them that ISIS do not represent Islam at all. They are not true Muslims and could easily be out of the circle of Islam. Now the English book is out. I translated the work myself. While translating it, of course, it's very dangerous when the author himself translates. I added a new chapter, I added a preface, and I added a few other ideas because I'm the writer. So the English now is targeting the youth around the world. First, Muslim youth around the world. Second, targeting people who are wondering, especially in the media and in the political arena, about the legitimacy of ISIS in Sunni Islam. These are challenging questions I have received, whether from Syria inside or from around the world, and needed to be addressed. I have noticed after several interviews that people were tired of us coming on satellite news channels saying we denounce ISIS. ISIS is un-Islamic. They wanted something specific. They wanted texts. They wanted counter-narrative, what is called. This book provides counter-narrative. There are various methods of debating or refuting. What I followed in this book is an easy way. This book is a fatwa. It's a legal edict opinion in Islam which obliges people to adhere to. So what I did in this book is that I summed up the proofs of ISIS and put them aside after acquainting myself with them, their strength. I presented for every idea a counter-narrative, a stronger proof that would smash their proofs without getting into detailed discussion of their own proofs. This would help the ordinary Muslim who is looking for an answer, is this right in Islam? I tell him, no, it's not right. I would like to give you one example here, just briefly. The issue of burning people, alive or dead. Now, this is a very hot topic, and it made a huge impact on the world. ISIS brought proofs. These proofs are stories, like the cousin of the Prophet, Ali, burned some of his enemies. Well, I didn't discuss the legitimacy of that narration. It takes few pages in the study of the methodology of narration, which the common Muslim is totally unaware of, and it is irrelevant to him. What I brought here, I brought devastating proof from the soundest book of prophetic tradition that says, do not torture by fire. God only tortures by fire. No human being is allowed to torture by fire. This is in Sahih al-Bukhari, the most reliable source. Now, ISIS has its own way of understanding and twisting things, but presenting such a proof when any ordinary Muslim reads that this is the counter-narrative, it is in the reliable books of Islam, prophetic tradition, an ordinary Muslim is convinced now that, well, ISIS is not following then the prophetic way. ISIS is not implementing Islam in the right way. Now, to go further and study deeply ISIS proofs, analyze them from inside, it takes a work between scholars, which is already done. I have done a book of 300 pages where I go into the narrations. For example, Ali's narration that he burnt one of his enemies who did heresy against God or worshipped Ali himself, considered him God. Then I went into this narration and analyzed it to prove that it is invalid. It takes few pages and it takes a lot of minute discussions. We wanted actually the ordinary Muslim to be out of this discussion. We want to present a very simplistic approach where Muslims can read something. The whole purpose of this is to be read in 1 hour, 2 hours. It's 70 pages. Any ordinary Muslim can pick it up and read it through it, and then they will definitely change their minds. Now what ISIS is convincing us, all Muslims around the world, that, well, non-Muslims, people of other faiths are your enemies. You can't be nice to them. You can't, they deserve no respect. They are our enemies. Their blood should be shed. These are some of the statements they are making. Well, I presented here, when I talked about non-Muslims, look, from books of fiqh, Ibn Abidin, most reliable work of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence in the Hanafi school, which is classical Islam, a major school of Islamic law. Probably 2/3 of Muslims around the world follow the law school of the Hanafi doctrine. I had quotes, backbiting is a major sin in Islam. You can't speak ill of a person behind his back. Now, what is understood commonly now that we cannot speak ill of Muslims, but we can speak ill of non-Muslims as we wish. Because those people of other faiths are our enemies. Now, I presented counter-narrative. I presented quotes from such books, such as Ibn Abidin, that speaking ill of a non-Muslim is worse than speaking ill of a Muslim. You're supposed to protect him more than protecting your fellow Muslim. Because there is enough motive for you to protect the honor of your fellow Muslim. You feel there's no motive from a religious point of view to protect your fellow citizen if he's even from another faith? No. This is why they say oppression against people of other faiths is worse than oppression against Muslims when it is done. I presented such texts when Muslim scholars, jurists, passed many centuries ago, they said you cannot tell a non-believer that he is an infidel, in Arabic kafir, because it upsets people. People's beliefs are something that is personal. You shouldn't tell them, well, you belong to my belief, you don't belong to my faith, or something like that. You see here, ISIS is trying to present the other as the enemy, the other as the one who should be exterminated, while I presented here the counter-narrative from Islamic law. If I want to give an example of the Islamic position on minorities, which is a very hot topic, I would go here to see that how ISIS, for example, breached the contract which Muslims had for centuries with all of these groups, religious groups. Christians, Alawites, Druze, Yazidis, they lived side by side with Muslims. Regardless of a certain level of oppression that was exerted during the Ottomans or before or after, but none of the Muslim governments in the past, whether it was the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, and the Ottomans who ruled by Sharia and had Islamic states and caliphates, none of them tried to deport these groups or exterminate them or force them into Islam. Because the reliable opinion which was practiced there is that these people are like us. They have the right to live, they have the right, all rights which Muslims have, even if the government is Islamic. This is based on a contract Prophet Muhammad made upon reaching Al-Madinah, when he migrated from Mecca to Al-Madinah. Now, to describe the society of Al-Madinah upon that moment, the group of Muslims was quite small group in Al-Madinah. So Al-Madinah contained pagans who did not join Prophet Muhammad in his faith. It contained also Jewish communities and the small Muslim community made of a few tribes of Al-Madinah and the immigrants. Prophet made a contract between the three groups together, the Muslims, the pagans, and the Jewish, making them all equal and one society together. And we could consider that as the base of having a civil state where people would be equal in front of the law, but all are given same rights to practice their religion without any discrimination. What ISIS is trying to convince us now that these should be exterminated. So these centuries-long contracts, covenants, have been breached, and without any warnings. So, for example, with the Yazidis, if anyone goes to read their literature, the literature of ISIS, they made an announcement. They declared that, well, we studied the beliefs of this group and found that the beliefs of this group are un-Islamic, heresy. This is why we went there and they have to become Muslims or face the punishment. This is totally un-Islamic. There is one important idea here. Muslim jurists, whenever they tackle the issue of relationship with people from other faiths, they consider Muslims visitors coming to this country, Syria for example, or Egypt, and the people of that country, the Copts of Egypt for example, or the Assyrians in Syria, the original people who lived there and had right to live in that land more than Muslims themselves. Although of course majority of people in Egypt and in Syria converted to Islam, but still Muslims never attempted to erase the history of the region, because those people who remained Christians in that region were original citizens of these countries, and Muslims had no right to deport them or to erase their history. And this is a very important view. This is why at the end of the book you will see that an interview is published, and I consider it very important that this interview is annexed. This interview is Matthew Barber from SyriaComment.com interviewed me in the wake of al-Golani's interview on Al Jazeera, which was scandalous in every term. Al Jazeera presents al-Golani's view, propagate for it. Ahmed Mansour, one of the top Al Jazeera presenters and media men, sits in front of al-Golani, one of the worst terrorists and enemies of Islam and of the world and of humanity, sits in him like a disciple sitting in front of his master and just takes his statement and tries to embellish his image and polish his opinions. One of the major things which al-Golani highlighted in that interview is that the Alawites and the Druze have to become Muslims, or he didn't mention the rest. Which means, because they don't accept even taxation from them. They consider that taxation system does not apply on these people, it applies only on Christians and the Jewish people, not on these heretic sects, which is totally opposite to the reliable opinion which has been practiced in the region for centuries. It's the opinion of the Hanafi school, which is the only opinion practiced in fiqh, although there are few other opinions, like the Shafi'i opinion or the Hanbali opinion, but it had never been practiced. So from a religious and Islamic point of view, all those who are not Muslims are equal citizens in the country with Muslims that have similar rights. So in the book I tried to present this idea that these people are equal to us and we have no right to exert any pressure on them apart from threatening them or kidnapping them or killing them or whatever it is. This is by presenting quotes from the greatest jurists in Islamic history. I believe the narrative of ISIS and other organizations like Al-Nusra Front was just crushed. And this is a sample of what is needed in our Muslim society. I spoke at the White House Summit second day in the State Department, and there were 65 countries, mostly foreign ministers and other delegates. And I presented my view in order how to defeat ISIS ideologically. And I believe this book is as important as any war against ISIS, and more important. Because we may defeat ISIS now on the ground. If the ideology is not defeated, it will beget more and more and more generations of terrorists. Now the generation of Osama bin Laden probably, I have read in some reports that even the US is trying to negotiate with Al-Qaeda in order to reach a certain middle way, because we have now a more dangerous, barbaric group that Al-Qaeda people started comparing. This is wrong, of course, because they are all on the wrong side. They are all killing innocent people. However, we need to defeat the ideology. That's very important. If we do not defeat the ideology, it will be very difficult and disastrous, because there will be generations who would join that ideology or be convinced by it. And this is what ISIS is trying through a very complicated network throughout the world. What we want to do is, three things are basics I represented in my suggestions in the war against ISIS. Number one, we need reform of the educational system in the Arab world. This is very serious. I give you one example. Osama bin Laden, until 1989, was in Saudi Arabia. Until 1989. His war, or the jihadist war in Afghanistan against the Soviets then, was supported by the US via the Saudis. He was in Saudi Arabia. Now he left Saudi Arabia just upon the Desert Storm. Why? Because the Saudis, he considered, are heretics, because they sought assistance of non-Muslims to kill Muslims. This is very important ideological here, pillar of what is taught, or what was taught about Islam. Where did Osama bin Laden pick up this? From the moon from another world? No, he was taught this actually in Saudi schools. In Saudi schools, he was taught that seeking assistance of non-Muslims against Muslims is heresy. A person who does this to a government who does this are no longer Muslims. This is part of what is known as Nawaqid al-Islam al-Ashra, 10 principles which bring people outside the circle of Islam, which were laid down by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the founder of the doctrine which the Saudi government follows. Unfortunately, it is up till now, this is part of the educational curriculum in Saudi Arabia. I just checked, it's part of the second grade in secondary school curriculum. It is part of the preparatory course for a university such as Muhammad ibn Saud University. Anyone who wants to join the university, any faculty has to go through a preparatory course in Islamic dogma. Part of it is these 10 principles. They are very dangerous. And ISIS adopts these 10 principles fully in total. So what turned Osama bin Laden against his own government was actually the ideology which his government sponsored and taught in schools. I'm not against the Saudi government. We're worried about them and about the future actually of security, peace in the region, because we don't want the collapse of another country or monarchy. We don't want mess or anarchy in a different region. It's very dangerous, and they have to realize that this alliance between the Saudi family and the religious authority, specifically here, the Wahhabi, has to stop or has to be amended. Now, the Mufti of Saudi Arabia, actually, the previous Mufti of Saudi Arabia was brave enough to take a position against the major founder of their doctrine, Ibn Abdul Wahhab, when he issued a fatwa that it is permissible to seek assistance of non-Muslims, even against Muslims, as it was the case with Iraq, the war against Iraq. Now, that was a very great step. Now, ISIS and all of these groups, and formerly Al-Qaeda, they all accused the Mufti of Saudi Arabia, Abdul Aziz bin Baz, of heresy because of his fatwa. They were not convinced because they consider his switching is political, because they were taught something different. So we need to reform the educational system. Second, I also mentioned my second opinion, suggestion, which is what type of Islam is being promoted around the world now. The type of Islam which is promoted is political. And religion is not about politics. Religion is about people's relationship with God. Religion is about finding the good in people. We call it purification of the heart, improvement, enlightenment, the soul shining, reaching the unseen. It's another way. Your servitude to God is not about politics. Now the whole image has changed. One example of this change is how we study the life of our Prophet, peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad. He lived, since he received the message, he lived 23 years. When we study his life, we focus on his wars. The focus, pick up any book on the life of Prophet Muhammad, you will see that the major focus is on his wars. His wars did not last more than 20 days. 20 days, his wars. 200 days, also with the trips back and forth on camels' backs to battlefields. 20 days of fighting can judge the life of a prophet, of a messenger of God on the face of the earth, who brought guidance, brought mercy. This is impossible. Generations before, like from 1st century after Prophet Muhammad till 13th century after Hijrah, just 100 years ago, the major focus of Muslim scholars when teaching the life of the Prophet was his character, not his wars. His character, his generosity, how he pardoned his enemy, how he treated his family, how he treated his enemies. how he treated children was merciful. That was the major focus for 13 centuries. Now all of a sudden, with the collapse of the Ottoman Caliphate, with the invasion of colonial powers to the Islamic world, with the rise of political Islam, the focus changed. We have books called Fiqh al-Sirah, the understanding of the life of the Prophet. The major focus there is the wars. Actually, wars of the Prophet were an independent discipline called al-Maghazi, studied only by scholars. The wars are not to be studied by ordinary Muslims, because it doesn't concern them how the Prophet fought and what legal rulings can be taken. Can we kill captives or not, or take booties or not? These things do not concern ordinary Muslim. What concerns an ordinary Muslim is how to behave in the society, how to connect to his surroundings. This is why we need to go back to the roots, where people, the center of Islam was Prophet Muhammad's example of mercy. And here you see how ISIS actually is making a huge distortion of the message of Islam. There's a famous verse in the Quran, in the chapter of prophets, al-Anbiya, that says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you, addressing Prophet Muhammad, God talking to him, but as mercy to the world. Now, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, speaker of ISIS, he has several YouTubes where he starts always his speeches by saying, "Praise be upon he who was sent with sword as mercy to the world." من بعث بالسيف رحمة للعالمين. The Arabic words. I have tried several videos. All the videos have found of Al-Adnani, spokesman of ISIS. He repeats the same statement. How could this be possible? Why don't we use this against them? It's distortion of the Quran, the Holy Quran itself. The Holy Quran says, we've not sent Muhammad but as mercy. He says, who is not sent but with the sword as mercy. He was not sent by sword. Prophet Muhammad was not sent by sword. He used power when it was necessary, but it was not the method or the main means to spread the word of Islam or the religion of God. This is very important. These are just some examples or samples of how ISIS distorts Islam, twists, manipulates, which I made clear to Muslims around the world. And I believe that this book already now is being printed in Egypt. And already the Jordanian government agreed to print 10,000 copies and put them in mosques. I'm receiving huge impact now in the response, huge response from around the world. We have plans now to translate the book into world languages. But this initiative is personal. This initiative is personal. It's not supported, excuse me, Muhammad Ghalib is not supported by SAD, is not supported, say, by Muslim Public Affairs Committee, is not supported by any government, is not supported by any organization. Some of my students who formed SK, Sacred Knowledge Organization, in the US and in the UK, took on their shoulders to print the book, present it, and even they collected donations to print 30,000 copies in Arabic and distribute them in Syria. There are a lot of people who talk, and there are people in the shadow who work. I hope that I am one of those people who work even in the shadow. There are people who receive checks with millions of dollars and hold conferences, and all they do, they live luxury for a few days, they go back after making statements. We've had many of these denouncing statements. They have no impact on Muslims. Muslims need serious work, and I hope that this is some, or the introduction, or the beginning and first steps of some serious work. Thank you.
Is he going to answer any questions?
At the end. So once again, we have lunch, and what we'll do is we'll ask Hind to come up and talk about her views on this, and then we will take some questions at the end. All right? Yeah, you're right.
It was a powerful speech.
Yeah.
Sheikh Abu Sayyid, Assalamu alaikum. Yes, Yes, I'm Christian from Damascus. I'm Christian from Damascus. And where I live, we live like Christian, Muslim, Shiites, Alawites. We live side by side. And when you see us today, this is Syria. This is exactly Syria. This is where we live. See? You want me to wait until they meet?
No, I think we should get. It's good. Oh.
I don't feel comfortable. Talk about them. Let them maybe take them for a while. I just worry about you that I want you to eat. So I don't want you to suffer while I'm speaking. So anyway, what you see now is Sheikh Muhammad here, and myself and others. This is where and how we lived before. And I'm glad that we have Muhammad and Sheikh Muhammad from Damascus, me too. And this is this example of how we live in a coexistence together in Syria. Of course, ISIS is a huge threat for the Syrian Christians. And I can't agree more than Sheikh Abul Huda in his book. But also, let's not forget that also ISIS is a threat for the Sunnis and for everybody they don't agree with their opinion. Today, we are facing a big problem in Syria. Our problem is the evils of the regime and the evils of ISIS. When Pamela and myself were last month in Zaatari, the women there, they have one thing to say. We want to go back home. We want to go back. We want to be an IDP, but we don't want to become a refugee. Today, the Syrian people inside Syria, they are facing a big threat from the regime with their barrel bombs and from ISIS. And I'm glad that Sheikh Yaqoubi made clear that this is not the Islam we know. Like when Sheikh Yaqoubi today is talking about all this, for me it's complicated. For me, I'm more simple than this. Islam, I know, it's more simple. It's where Sheikh Abu Huda will come to my house and we'll have lunch and he can pray in my house. This is the Islam I know. The Islam I know that we'll all live together and they have not only tolerance, we are coexistence together. When we did the Interfaith event last month, we have one goal, is the protection of the civilians. And when we want to say protection of the civilians, is the protection of all the civilians. In the Muslim and the Christian religion, we don't distinguish between the civilians. All the civilians are equal. If they are Christian, Muslim, Yazidi, Shiite, Sunni, Alawite, everybody were equal. And the same visions today I have with Sheikh Abu Huda. We have the same vision. We need to protect our Syrian people. Doesn't matter. We need to protect them. And this is today we're calling for. As a mother and as a Christian mother, and the Syrian mother, I want the best for the Syrian people. What you see today, all those refugees going back, just go in the boat and become refugees. They're scared. They're scared of the death for their children. Is this what we want? Is this what we want to have, to lose our, it's like brain drain for all the Syrians to leave Syria and go? No. We need to stop ISIS. Definitely we need to stop ISIS. ISIS in the grassroots, and I can assure you because I spent 1 month between Jordan and Turkey. People hate ISIS. It is not our culture, it's not our religion, it's not our Syrian values. ISIS is an enemy for everybody. So for today, we're calling everybody to fight ISIS. but let's not forget who's the cause. When people will see the gap, people, the death of the Syrian every day by barrel bombs, they want also to get rid of Assad. So today, when we want to wish well for the Syrian people, we need to wish them well to get rid of the evil, the two evils. There's not one evil. When you say fighting ISIS, I'm great, thank you. But let's not forget that we have the evil too, the Assad regime, who was the cause of having ISIS. Because I remember the first 6 months I was in Damascus. We have a non-violent uprising. This was our revolution. Where is it now? Where is it? Because of the violence and the killing the Assad regime rules, the people start using arms. And then the ignorance of the war, watching the Syrian people dying. So ISIS has a good gate for them to come into control. So please today, I'm glad that we have the same vision. All Syrians have the same vision, is the protection of the civilians and safe zone for them to live. And this is what we're hoping. And now I leave you to eat.
Actually, if I could invite Sheikh Yaqoubi and Hind up to the front, just so we can take a few questions. First, do we have any questions from the audience, and then I'll ask you too. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay, so my name is Samar Taman. I've been a member of the American Muslim community for 42 years. My first question is, I thank you very much, Sheikh Yaqoubi. I think, your message should be the #1 message in the media, in the social media. And if there's anything that should be done, is exactly what you are doing. But let me ask one question. We keep using the word ISIS, and the Muslim community, whether they are in the United States or abroad, and the Syrian community, we are crediting them. We are giving them credit. This is neither Islamic nor a state. They are printing passports of ridicule. Why can't we call them TIS, the terrorists in Syria and Iraq? Anything till the terrorists in Iraq and the Lebanon. We have to start with this. We cannot refute ISIS, we have to refute terror. So this is my question for you. What can we do to change that image from the beginning?
You're absolutely right. And does not give them any legitimacy by using the name, because this is how they are referred to in the media. The difference between IS or ISIL or ISIS. In Arabic, Daesh we have. Actually, Daesh in Arabic is quite good because it gives totally different image. But however, in order to make our refutation, popular, we need to know who's you're refuting. So what you're saying is good actually, but should address CNN, PBS, these major channels. When they change the reference to ISIS, then of course the usage on a grassroots level will change. So now in the Arab world, instead of a Dawla Islamiyya in the beginning, soon it changed into Daesh. It's not common. In the West, it's still either ISIL or ISIS. The State Department, I believe, or the White House prefers to use ISIL, noticed in Obama's speeches, because of the level. However, it's not Islamic, it's un-Islamic, it's very obvious. The use is just for reference, it's not for legitimacy. But I would prefer to use something different. But then no one will pick up on it. Who are you refuting? They are known as ISIS, so we need to address them with the best reference.
It was very enlightening to hear your lecture. In fact, the majority of the Muslims see Islam in the same light as you do. The question I have for you is, you touched upon a conversation that Prophet Muhammad, when he did the Medina Treaty, he had the Jews, pagans, and Christians work together as a treaty. The question to you is very fundamental. Did Prophet Muhammad run an Islamic government or a secular government? Because the government was run by three different, each with the Jews were dealt with their own religious traditions to make their decisions, so were Christians. So can you call that a basis for an Islamic government? Or we never had a real Islamic government? Like you said earlier, we shouldn't have a religious government, we should have a secular government.
I would reply to this by saying, I wouldn't use the word secular in this regard, I would use the word civil in this regard. Because, here's the point, if it was Islamic, then the Jews would have been forced to adhere to the Islamic civil law, for example. They were not. Even the penal law, they were not forced. Actually, the Torah or the Jewish law was in practice among the Jewish community. And this is a proof that the Islamic law was practiced only for Muslims, not for the whole society. So from that angle, we can see freedom of religion, freedom of practice of religion, quite established from an early time. And it gives us legitimacy here that what we need is, and this is the opinion of the majority of the Syrian people, they're not asking for an Islamic state. For those people, actually, I say, Syria is already Islamic in terms of laws. 80% of the law, of the civil law in Syria is compatible with the Sharia. Even the Napoleon law, civil law, actually 80% of it is compatible with the Sharia. And I have one of the greatest jurists from the 19th century, Qadri Basha. He authored the book. The book is on the compatibility between the Napoleon law and the Islamic Sharia law, the Hanafi madhab, the Hanafi school. So this is why we're not against, actually, the best form in this modern time would be the form of a civil state where everyone's right of practice of religion would be respected. Now, I tell you why Muslims are very wary of a secular state. Because they have in their minds the example of Tunisia during the times of Habib Bourguiba, where hijab was forbidden. There was more freedom of speech, and still in the US, in Europe, more than several Islamic countries in the past. This is why they're wary of what's type of secular.
Too.
Exactly, thank you.
I need 3 books from you, signed by you. I'll give it to Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, and with your signature. I have been able to have him change. He used to bash Quran. He has quit bashing Quran in the last 2.5 years after I talked to him and gave him a copy of the Quran. So I need 3 copies to give it to O'Reilly and Hannity.
With pleasure. Everyone here in the room will get a free copy.
If I may just take moderator's privilege and ask a question. So, since we are on the Hill and it's very policy oriented, I wanted to ask Hind. So now with, originally the U.S.'s focus was on the Bashar al-Assad and the atrocities going on. Now with the rise of ISIS, there has been almost a silence towards Bashar al-Assad, and the focus is now shifted to ISIS. From a policy perspective, what would you recommend to the United States, Europe, and the rest of the international community on how we can address not only Bashar, but also ISIS? Yes, like what do you think that the U.S., for example, should do?
First of all, the concern of the people today is their safety. And the problem is in the East Syria now, the ISIS is controlling the East, and people are there under siege, under starvation. But also, let's not forget, there's in other places, like in part of Deir Zor, where there is also, and Ghouta and the suburb of Damascus, is also under siege from starvation. So today, my recommendation is we don't separate the policy. Today, the people on the ground, they're against the regime, could catch them and kill them, and also against ISIS. So anything you want to do, you have to do it together to get rid of both. Today, the people, number one, we need to think about safe zone for the Syrian people. You have no idea people live in their field. People now, they rather take the boat and die in the sea, and not to go and live under the regime area where, under the liberated area where there is a barrel bomb or the ISIS. People, they want to live in safe zone. So number one, we need to focus on this. This is not a joke. This is not we're sitting here and talking. We know people are dying every day. And you know what? I don't understand. You live your principles in this world. And this is what I learned from your school, from US schools, about live your principle, humanitarian. I don't understand why the Syrian people are numbers now. Nobody care about us that if we're dying. And we're dying with the ISIS and with the regimes. We need to stop this killing. This is very simple. We can't just keep meeting and brainstorming about this. This is so important for us. Stop the killing for the Syrian people. Protect the Syrians. It doesn't need too much discussion.
All right, so
I have actually also some serious plans to achieve these goals, which Hind highlighted. Number one, of course, protection of civilians with a free zone. Number two, we need to deploy ground troops. This is very important, that ground troops should be deployed to get rid of ISIS and Assad both together. I tell you why. Probably some governments don't want to get rid of Assad because they are in fear of ISIS invading Damascus or expanding, because the opposition is weak, or because of al-Nusra Front being strong also, and the opposition is denying the denunciation of al-Nusra actions. I believe the deployment of ground troops would, number one, would outnumber any such faction which is extremist, and would allow the liberation of Al-Raqqa, the headquarters of ISIS. There is the center of ISIS, which is getting all the support to other regions. Then would allow change of the regime in Damascus very peacefully. Assad will have to hand over power, and Damascus will be free at that time, and then the groups from regional powers, Jordan, Turkey, supported by US or other countries, will enter Damascus. It won't be the militia who would loot Damascus and take revenge from civilians. It would be under international protection. I called for this intervention 3 years ago, and it was at that time much easier. There was these complexities, but we need to get rid of both of them, and unless, if we don't get rid of Assad, you know, ISIS is capable of recruiting more and more. Because they use all of these videos where Assad kills and bombs to tell people, look, we have jihad against an Alawite regime. So people come to help. This is very wrong principle, but they are using it. So let's, as I said it before, cut the head of the snake. The head of the snake is the Assad regime, which gives legitimacy to all of these fractions, whether ISIS or Nusra or any other militia that is outside the circle of moderate Islam or is fanatic. This is very important here. And Assad, by the way, turned the Syrian uprising into a military uprising by providing arms in the black market. Second, by releasing some of the worst and most dangerous prisoner Islamists from prison, including big names. So let's work on these two directions, and the demand should be deployment of ground troops. This is very important. Syrians are very much convinced. You wouldn't see all these Syrian refugees running around the world and risking their lives if they found a safe refuge in Syria, if they saw the world coming to their support.
Sheikh Muhammad, thank you so much for your great presentations today. I have a question for you. Today we spoke in the U.S. Congress. What do you think, besides you recommended the deployment of ground troops? Russia has been building military capacities in Syria, deploying troops there. Today Reuters reported that they're also flying surveillance missions, using drones. Some in the White House seems to be divided. Some are suggesting that the United States should work with Russia on combating ISIS in Syria. Others are saying that would hurt the credibility of the United States. Do you think that the United States should work with Russia against ISIS in Syria? Do you think that the pitch that President Putin will be making at the United Nations Security Council, that the U.S. and the anti-ISIS coalition should join forces with Russia and Assad, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think that could help defeat ISIS?
Well, let me just speak from a viewpoint of a Syrian. I'm not here to tell the U.S. administration what is best or in the best interest of the Russians or not. But definitely, ISIS is against the whole world. And whether the Russians or the Syrians, they want to get rid of ISIS. But the Russians actually have interest in Syria. And the Syrian opposition failed to establish dialogue with the Russians from the beginning. And that was a big failure. Now, the devil, we need to speak with the devil. If the devil is our enemy, we need to speak with the devil. It's very obvious, and this is my viewpoint, that Syria is a playground of the Soviet Union and still a playground of Russia from 1955. The first army deal, $25 billion, which Soviet Union sold to Syria. From that time, it's well known. We all know that the Crimea War between the Ottomans and the Russians, and Russia at the time, Sicilian Russia, actually took place because of the conflict over Russian interests in Palestine in protecting the Orthodox Christian minority. So Russia has this in its mind. Now, when the US interferes, the Russians will not dare. I believe, to be honest, I believe that America's state of inaction encouraged the Russians, encouraged the Iranians to support Assad regime more and more, to expand their interests in the region, and this state of inaction is very wrong. It actually encouraged ISIS, it encouraged other fractions on the ground. Anyone who wanted now to take a piece of the cake is taking a piece of the cake, including the Russians and the Iranians and ISIS and the Nusra and everyone else. The Syrian people are lost in this equation. It is just a state of inaction. Serious action has to be taken to get rid of Bashar Assad and to fight ISIS together. The Russians would not have an important role in that process afterwards.
I just want to add one thing about this question. I have cousins and relatives and families in Damascus, in the suburb, and in the Christian Valley. All of them, nobody wants to fight anymore. They are defected. They are running outside Syria. They don't care how, because they don't want to serve in the military service. So today, let's think about what's this action of Russia, little bit outside the box. They are there to protect the regime, because now the regime, even Alawite, I have an Alawite friend called me 2 days ago in Beirut now, trying to get her 2 brothers out. Nobody wants to fight anymore in this, because they know that Assad's family, the closest family, are already in Dubai and in Russia doing business. Their kids are dying. So today, when we think about Russia, why Russia is there? Because they have to defend the regime. So let's think about, they are there to defend the regime. They are there just because the regime knows that there's nobody waiting in the national army anymore. So we need to think about this, how to get those people away, to defend them and to get rid of the regime, because nobody wants to fight with them anymore. And this is a fact.
So I do need to
We're
address.
the individual had a chance to talk.
Sheikh Muhammad honor coming to my name is Yusuf. And
Can you speak up, please?
sir, you mentioned that you were in favor of deploying ground troops. This is to fight Islamic State or the Assad's forces?
Both.
Both. Then how would you? I noticed in the past that ISIS tends to spin this narrative that the United States and its Western allies is waging a war on Islam. How do you counter that narrative?
This is already legitimate, and I tackled this issue in my book under the chapter Seeking Assistance for Non-Muslims. And at the beginning of my speech, I handled the theological aspect of it. And we see that now there's a consensus amongst Muslims around the world that ISIS does not represent Islam. So this is very legitimate here. And again, with waging war against Assad regime, it's very obvious that the oppressors have to be removed. This is from an Islamic point of view. This is very legitimate. And believe me, if this took place before, we wouldn't have reached this very deteriorating situation, complex situation. And still, you can get the consensus of the Muslim world, and you see Muslims even, going in demonstration, carrying the American flag, and celebrating when they see U.S. intervention. It's a way. I said this in the beginning. I said this in Europe, in England, and I say this here in the States. Still, there is an opportunity to save the Syrian people. It's an opportunity when you help someone in need. Friends in need, friends in need. Still, you can win. The best way, if you want to build really a great bridge between Islam and the West, a great opportunity is helping the Syrian people at this time. Because the whole world now is on one side, and ISIS is on one side, and ISIS is using Syrian people's suffering in order to legitimize its war against the world.
Actually, we are out of time. So maybe if the speakers are available to talk individually afterwards.
I really, it's very important. We're dancing around a lot. I'm hearing what you're saying. There's desperation. Definitely we see it. But you said safe zone. Sheikh, you mentioned free zone.
It's safe.
All of these organizations are calling for a no-fly zone. We're asking for military intervention consistent. We're going to have another 20 years of war. We have to take responsibility for that. Why are Muslim organizations calling for no-fly zone? We just saw a no-fly zone in Libya. Look at the result. Okay? We just saw on the ground, Sheikh, with all respect, we have seen on the ground troops. They're still in Afghanistan. They're still in Iraq. What are we calling for? I know we are in the halls of Congress, but the only solution is negotiation. The only solution is getting rid of Assad by negotiation. Whatever pressure, he will step down. The only solution is your solution. That is the goal. We will spend the rest of our lives with the entire Middle East in disaster. And I am really concerned. If there is a thing as a no-fly zone, why aren't there other interfaith organizations supporting that? Why are the Muslims alone in this? This is a naive move. Where are the Christian organizations supporting us?
So do you have a question?
Yes. The question is, what do you mean by safe zone? What do you mean by no-fly zone? Are you calling for war? Continuous war. And my knowledge, it is a big challenge, and I apologize if I have shown disrespect.
Passion is good, Sahar, and it's good that you're sitting here and telling us what to do and not to do. I'm sorry. I have family who are dying every day. So I understand what you're saying. I understand about negotiation. I believe in conflict resolution and negotiation. We've been trying a lot. Today, thank you for your passionate statement, but in the end of the day, my family are dying. And I'm calling for protecting zone because I want my family not to die. Every day there is hundreds of Syrians are dying. So beautiful to sit down here and tell me things to do or not to do, Sahar. But please, I am now suffering with my family and I need to stop this killing. I don't care. Negotiation, a safe zone, anything, I want this killing to be stopped. And that's it.
Of course, 4.5 years of negotiations got us nowhere. And I believe with the Assad regime, Russia and Iran backing it, will have more 20 years and we'll get nowhere in negotiations. We've seen now the Mistora's last initiative. The regime, Assad regime, is getting now tougher and tougher. When it was under pressure, out of pressure, we saw Geneva 1 and Geneva 2. We got nowhere. The Russians backing the Assad regime. And we need a solution. Syrians are being killed in either way. War is a necessity in this regard, and is the lesser of two evils. We're not calling for war for the sake of war. We're calling just to get rid of ISIS and the Assad regime in order to save more lives, not in order to kill more lives. I agree with you that negotiations are the best solution. This is why if you notice what I said is, we don't want invasion of Damascus because the fall of Damascus. Now, even now, to be honest, without military intervention, there might be 1 million people killed in Damascus if it falls, either under Jaysh al-Islam or later on under ISIS. 1 million people, there is a risk that they would be killed, both from Shiites, Alawites, Sunnis, and all other sects. If just Jaysh al-Islam succeeds in penetrating Damascus now, and then later on, I believe that ISIS is going to invade Damascus. So we need troops from the surrounding regions here to protect Damascus. And when Assad leaves, there will be some security for the rest of the Syrian people. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Sheikh Yaqoubi and Hind Kabawat for joining us today. I'd like to thank the Syrian American Council, Omar especially, for taking the lead on this. And if there's anything that MPAC or SAC can do to help you policymakers with this, please do contact us. Thank you so much.